We're moving into a new section as we continue to talk about the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And we're going to start to deal, probably for about the next month, on the fruit. Well, we're starting with the fruits of the Spirit, but for the next month, I'm focusing more on just the first one. And Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, he wrote about the fruits of the Spirit, and he says, but the fruit of the Spirit, the evidence that you have the Spirit of God in you, a byproduct of the Spirit of God, how you know that you are walking connected to the Spirit of God, living inside of you, residing in you, under the influence of the Spirit of God is first this. The very first thing that you will notice, the very first thing that other people should notice is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Many of us, we know these. We've probably been taught them since we were little kids, and you might even have these kind of two verses memorized. And so when I started to read these, the first thing I asked is, okay, so why is this being said? What is the context? Why is this written down? Why did Paul share this? So I started to back up a few verses to read, why is this being written about? And in verse 13, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. And that's where I pause right there. Because I love the sound of that right there. That something just struck in my heart. Specifically, you were brought to freedom from the law, from the rules of faith, and from judgments and demands and things that have been layered on to what we think religion is over the years, that they just keep compiling, and things that felt like a weight on you. And that is what this whole book of Galatians is about, that Paul writes this letter. He's helping people get free so that they can learn to have this love relationship with God, because so many people have built it into these rules. And so to start moving into a relationship with God that is rooted in this amazing love and the power of the Spirit of God, that will produce kind of a different kind of life in us than maybe if I just live a life trying to do all the right things and know the right things and do the right things. But maybe I could be motivated out of something different. And he says, he keeps going on, but do not use your freedom to give you an opportunity to indulge in the flesh. Because of a relationship with God, this love relationship with Jesus, it doesn't give you a freedom to do anything that you want to do. Instead, what I want you to do with this new freedom, a different kind of way of living, is serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. But be very careful, because if you bite and devour each other, and suddenly I get this imagery, and it's the imagery that it's designed to give you is a pack of wild dogs that are snarling and snapping, and this graphic language is given on purpose, because sometimes that is what we do in Christian communities. Watch out, or you'll be destroyed by each other. And so how do we avoid that? How do we avoid, this biting and devouring of each other? And beyond that, how do we learn to love and learn to serve each other? And, obviously, we can make a rule. That would be the first thing. Let's make a sign: no biting or devouring. We'll put a sign up as we walk in church. We could pick any one of these three. I like all three of them, particularly the middle one, the no biting rule. We could just do that. I'll make a sign up when you come to church or when we live just our life. No biting. The one on the right is Saturn, and he's actually biting his son's head off. Don't do that. That's bad. Cannibalism is a bad thing. Don't do that. So we can make a sign, and that might be a little too graphic, though it would make a point. And it's not a bad point. All right, it's a good rule. Don't bite people. It would work. If we wanted it to work, we would actually, it would work if we had a heart for this kind of thing. If we really didn't want to bite people, we would have this kind of thing. We could be engaged in this at some deep level, and we would experience this. But ultimately, it may not work just to have a sign, just to encourage us. Well, don't bite each other. Because that really isn't a big enough of a motivation, because we would really need to have something that's transforming us inside, and we'd really have to want to do it ourselves. We'd have to want to believe that, not just have a sign to do that, because I see stop signs, and that doesn't mean I always stop at them. I mean, they're a suggestion. I was always taught that if they have a white frame around a stop sign, it's an optional. It's a suggestion. It's a good thing to do. But if you don't have a heart for it, you're not going to obey it. But beyond having a desire, you'd have to have some power for this, that we would have to not want to hurt each other or bite each other. Because if you look closely at your own love life, if you look at the relationships that you're in with people that you're in your own life, people maybe that you even committed your life to, maybe like a spouse, if you're going to be honest, and I know you're going to, you would know that even the people that you're the closest to, you bite them, you hurt them, you're not always loving, you're not always kind to them. And they're the most important person. And that you know that your own efforts, you don't have the ability to not hurt them all the time. We still blow it. I really blow it, and I don't always do well. We hurt those people that are the closest to us. Verse 16, so I say. So here's what I suggest, says Paul, beyond making a sign, having a really good one, walk in the Spirit. But if you are led by the Spirit, we live by the Spirit. It says in verse 25, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Because if I do walk in the Spirit, if I do that, back in verse 16, it says, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Meaning, you and I, we won't be biting each other. We won't be devouring each other. We won't be hurting and cutting each other with our words. Not because we put a sign up, though we can make a really cool sign. We won't be biting and devouring each other because we're now walking connected deeply with God, filled with the Spirit of God. And when we do that, the natural result of walking connected with the God who loves me, filled with the Spirit and the life of God inside of me, and joy and peace and gentleness and kindness. And as I start to look at this, I'm like, well, that's just the character of God. Because God is love, God is joy, God is full of peace and patience and kindness, all the things that are a part of God. And if you and I are full of that and walking full of the Spirit of God, some of the things that will naturally start to come out of us, that will start to grow in us and even be formed in us, are the actual character qualities of God. And I go, wow, wouldn't that be something? That would be awesome. So then I started to dream about this. Well, what would that look like in my own life? If what was noticed, if what was most apparent to other people as you look at my life, and especially people that maybe don't know God, and those who call themselves the people of God, what if they noticed in me? What if as we hung out and we're doing life together, what if what they noticed was the character of God? Wouldn't that be something? What if people saw in us most was the peace of God or the joy of God that was inside of us, or laughter and hope, and that we just really even enjoyed each other and loved people regardless of the circumstances of their life or what they're going through or the struggles they're in or who they are. And I go, what about patience? What if we were just kind people? And what if people who didn't know God thought that was what a follower of Jesus was? What if that is the first thing they thought of what Christians were? What if that's what they experienced most when they met followers of Jesus? And I go, well, that would be something. That would be really cool. Joseph Aldrich, in his book, he wrote one called Lifestyle Evangelism. He says this. He says the key to evangelism, it's not great evangelistic meetings, though there's nothing wrong with great evangelism crusades. The key to evangelism, which is sharing the love of God with others, is actually a beautiful bride. You see, brides don't demand or force compliance. They capture hearts, not like in an untouchable mannequin on display in a stained glass window bridal shop. That's not how to do it. The beauty of the bride is to be functional and touchable and accessible, not content to withdraw as if obsessed with her own beauty. Oh, I'm so holy, fretful of wrinkling her dress. Instead, the bride is engaged in the world around her, stooping to serve and share the life that gave her life its beauty. The fruit of the Spirit is that kind of an engagement. In the world that we live in, the fruit of the Spirit is love. So today, this last week, as I was just kind of studying and working through things, I'm like, I just want to better understand the very first thing on the list of the fruits of the Spirit. I just want to understand love better. So one of the reasons we're going to start here is because nothing on earth has more power, nothing has more power to reveal the face of God to people who don't know God than when the people who say they love God demonstrate in touchable, visible, tangible, real ways the authentic love of God. I thought, well, that should be where we start. 1 John 4:12 says it this way: no one has ever seen God, and that makes it really difficult to know God. But if we love one another, it might just give people a chance, because God lives in us and His love is made complete in us. It is so hard for us, if not impossible at times, to see eternal things, because no one's ever seen God. No one's seen the face of God. But if love that is directed by God can somehow be put on display for people to see God, it would kind of just help clear the picture up just a little bit. God has changed me. And I love that part of what I get to do in this world is I get to help others see God a little bit clearer so that maybe their walls can come down a little bit more and maybe God can move in their hearts. And sometimes I really blow it. And I do the opposite. Few things on earth have more power to distort the face of God than when the people of God fail to demonstrate in tangible ways the love of God, because that's true too. Sheldon Van Auken wrote about his search for truth and struggle with and the reality of Christianity in his book called A Severe Mercy. He said, the best argument that I have found yet for Christianity is Christians, their love, first of all, and their joy, their certainty of things to come, and their completeness. But the strongest argument against Christianity is also Christians when they are somber and joyless and grouchy, and when they're self-righteous and smug in complacent consecration, when they're narrow and judgmental and repressive. Then in my mind, Christianity dies 1,000 deaths.
Oh my gosh, so many amens.
And the face of God becomes more and more distant. Because very few things have the power on earth to reveal or distort the face of God like love or the lack of it, which is maybe why the first thing on the list that we are studying on the fruits of the Spirit would be love, because it might be the most important. Years ago, there was a man named Jerry Falwell, and he was a very strict Christian, very fundamental, and he pushed his moral values on the world, and that was not a bad thing. Anyhow, he had a conversation with a man named Larry Flint, who founded and ran the porn company Hustler. Both of them have since passed away in the last 10, 15 years. But at one point, these two guys were talking, and there's kind of like these polar opposite men. And Larry Flint, the porn man, said to Jerry, the pastor, he says, I really actually like you, Mr. Falwell, and though I disagree on a lot of topics, I think you would like me too. But I could never come to your side because at the end of the day, Christians are no different. They hate like everyone else. And not just people like me, he said. They hate each other. Divisions and schisms and church splits. You're the family values guy, Mr. Falwell. Divorce is as high among Christians as us heathens, but we throw better parties. So I'm going to stay over here. And I'm sure Mr. Falwell had a really good response for, as he was kind of defending Christianity. And I'm sure he was gracious and kind. But the truth is, there's not actually a response that you can make to that. There's nothing that you can really say. And I'm sure that you all have got stories of your own. Every single one of us probably does, if you're going to be honest. Stories maybe where you have experienced this also. I was working in another church, and this woman I had a conversation with, and she had told me that she had been working for years. She worked in Christian organizations, ministering, and she loved it. And one day, she just kind of felt like she needed to make a change. So she got out of working in this Christian group, and she was excited to get, the secular job and have an opportunity to maybe share Jesus with people that would never come into a church who didn't know God, but she was frustrated by some of the things that she discovered. And as she grew to know some of the people that she was working with, some of her coworkers, she started to hear stories being shared by them that made her sad because they were having these bad experiences with people who called themselves followers of Jesus. And she told about Michael, who grew up in a Christian home in a solid denomination, who was kind and a thoughtful man. And his parents were Christians, and he knew the Bible better than any pastor. But what he learned about Christianity as a kid was that it's all about the rules. It's all about the judgments, who's in, who's out. Very spiritual rules, very judgmental rules, and as he grew older, he realized how empty and hollow his own faith with God was. So he left the church and wanted nothing to do with that version of God. And then you've got Patricia. She said she cares deeply for her clients in a way that few people dare to risk, and she's frustrated by Christians, disturbed how they can talk so much about love and yet show so little of it. She was amazed at how often Christians would gossip and talk behind each other's backs, and usually they did it in the form of a prayer meeting. Let's have our little Bible study and we'll pray for each other, but let's really share the juicy gossip. She had no desire to join any of that. Amber is brilliant, highly educated, atheist, tough as nails on the outside, but inside she's just a marshmallow. And sadness and anger spilled out of her as she shared story after story about Christians told her that she was going to go to hell when she died. And they also told her the struggles that she had in her life were all because of demons, because she was being oppressed, because she didn't give her life to Jesus yet. And my friend, and I was talking with this lady, she shared that these Christian messages that were the things that she was learning, and she had realized none of these messages that her coworkers were getting, none of them were motivated out of love for them. And she said, I'm so grieved about each of my coworkers that Christians didn't seem to bother caring about their life or hearing their stories or celebrating their victories or weeping with their struggles. None of my peers told me a story about a Christian who would show them love or patience or kindness or mercy. She said, I'm so humbled that they would even share these stories with me and be open and vulnerable with me because they also are now learning that I am a follower of Jesus. She said, but maybe the reason why they're sharing them with me is because maybe their heart is still, even a small amount, might be open to the gospel, hoping that maybe I can live it out for them. And part of what is frustrating about these stories is that the kind of love that is needing to be seen and needing to be shown that she's talking about, it's just not that hard. It's not that difficult of love to show, because sometimes love is as simple as a cup of cold water or, as a gesture of kindness. Leonard Sweet tells a story of Charlie and Sarah. And Charlie and Sarah, they've been dating for a while, and Charlie decides it's time to kiss this girl. And wanting to be very respectful at the end of the date, he didn't know what else to do because he was so awkward, and he just said, can I kiss you good night? And her eyes widen and she lights up, but she didn't say anything as she was kind of anticipating this really great moment, but he was a little bit confused. And he's like, can I kiss you good night? Again, her eyes lit up and she just smiles and she says nothing. And beyond confusion, Charlie now is getting really frustrated. So he says, are you deaf? Frustrated as her, she just blurts out, I'm not deaf, but are you paralyzed? And the point of the story is kiss someone. And It's not that hard. Invite someone over. It's not that hard in our lives. Take someone fishing, fix someone's car, buy someone dinner, mow their yard, make a friend. We don't have to be these untouchable mannequins in a bridal shop that are so obsessed with our own holiness that this bride was so scared to get wrinkled, to get anything on her dress, to get muddy, to spend maybe time with the wrong kind of people. Just kiss someone, because people are more ready for that kiss than we know. But what if they're not? What if they're just not receptive? What if the unbelieving people of the world are not just waiting for a hug? What if it's that they're actually hostile? Because then what does love look like then? Andrei Kudrescu, who worked for NPR, you may have heard of this. He did a satire on Christian views of eschatology, meaning the end times. And he did it on public radio, on the show All Things Considered. And I love that show. And on that show, he criticized and ridiculed the different views that Christians had of the end times, and that those who believe in the rapture, followed by 7 years of torment, that those people that are left behind, they're the ones he really targeted to mock. So he just mocked them. And he said the evaporation of 4 million people who believe in this kind of nonsense would leave the world a better place. NPR was quick to apologize for this commentary, for his statements, though Andre never did apologize. In fact, he's actually more convinced ever since that he's right, because he got so many letters from Christians, so much hate mail from Christians, and even death threats, that convinced him even more that the evaporation of these people from earth believing this thing would actually leave the world a far better place, and would actually kind of hope that it was true. The reaction from Christians towards this man's cutting remarks of Christians was so much more damaging. But the hostility of our culture, what if it is intense against us? See, when our culture starts to spit nails at us, do we get to spit nails back? What does love look like when that happens? And how do we negotiate hostility? And can the fruit of the Spirit even survive? Or is it just going to kind of wither on the vine? And Jesus said, "You've heard it said, love your neighbor. I say, love your enemies." Okay, but that's great, Jesus. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But how does that work? And what does it even look like? And if we're gonna get real, how does it feel? Is this supposed to be like some warm and gooey love? Like, am I supposed to feel love for this? Is God wanting us to have some syrupy, sentimental feelings for people that are hostile and mean toward us? Because there are people that come into my life that I don't always like. And I'm going to assume that'd be the same with you. You may not ever confess that. I will be the one to confess it. I don't like everyone. And the thing is, they don't all like me. Sometimes there's just friction. You ever just, there's just some people, it's like, I don't know why. There's just friction. I just don't like them. Anyone? Please. Thank you. Thank you. And there doesn't even have to be a reason. There's just a struggle, and then I start to wonder, well, am I failing? Because I don't feel any love for these people, and I don't feel any syrupy sentimentality for what I'm just going to call them an enemy, someone I don't like, someone that's maybe. So how do I have a different kind of love? Because love can be very simple. It can just be a cup of cold water as a gesture of kindness, but sometimes it's not easy and it's not simple. I left it upstairs. My dad wrote love letters, and I meant to bring them downstairs. I have a stack of love letters. Have you ever gotten a love letter? Have you ever written a love letter? You know what a love letter is, right? What is a love letter? What would you put in a love letter? How much you love someone. Do you always say that I love you, though?
All the silly, sappy, gooey reasons why their person is amazing.
Why they're so, you just gush about them. Yes. You don't always even have to, you would know a love letter, even if it never said I love you. you know what a love letter is. See, after my dad passed away about 9 years ago, a friend of mine, they gave me this stack of letters that he had written to, this woman gave them to me, that he had written to her about 8 years before he ever met my mom. Oh, I know. Kind of awkward. And it's all still wrapped in ribbon. And I know, it's not awkward for me. I think it's kind of awesome. It's one of the only things I have from my dad that he wrote that I have in my possession. My dad was a pastor. He had 30 years of sermons. Not once did he write them down, and that was in the day before they were ever recorded. I don't know one of my dad's sermons for 30 years. But I have these love letters. It's the only thing of his I have written down to a woman that's not my mom. But it's not messy. But love letters are love letters. It's a one-size-fits-all. They're full of sentiment and tender words. And you just know it's a love letter when you read it. And when you write a love letter, you know it's a love letter. But what about a letter that might be from an adult child to an estranged parent? Or a letter from a spouse who dearly loves their husband or their wife, but when they're writing things down, they're writing down some very painful issues and unpleasant feelings that they never feel like they can talk about or discuss because it just never comes up. But it's still a love letter. Issues maybe that aren't even resolved. And unless they press through, they've just got to write it down. They don't feel like they can have a healthy relationship where they're hard words. Can the fruit of the Spirit be a letter like that in our lives? Sometimes love is very simple, where it's a cup of cold water, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's as difficult and confusing as bringing someone that you love to a treatment center to break an addiction that just might save their life. And they're screaming at the top of their lungs how much they hate you the entire way, but the fruit of the Spirit is love. So what is love? As I think we all we know there's many different kinds of love. I love my wife, I love my kids, I love my friends, I love them all differently. There's romantic love that's intoxicating and powerful, and there's committed love that stays engaged and involved even when the bloom is off the rose, and there's a selfless love that and even sacrificial love, and where you give and you serve and you pour out, and people like that are able to be kind and gracious, and they stoop to serve others. And there's courageous love that opposes evil, and it stands against and even brings a judgment too, which means if we have kind of a one-size-fits-all overly sweet Valentine's Day definition of what love is, in certain situations, that is actually going to then be the enemy of love. If you give the wrong kind of love at the wrong time, you can do damage, and it's the opposite. Because sometimes Spirit-born love says, stop, enough, no more. The fruit of the Spirit is love, and the fruit of the Spirit sometimes is having the courage to say, no. Dan Allender, in his book, Bold Love, he tells the story of John, whose father was this cruel, violent man who tore him to shreds for 3 decades, ripped him apart. And then John got married, and when he got married, now the wife became the target of abuse by his dad. And John did what he always did. John had learned growing up in this home with his father how kind of coping tools of what to do with his father's anger and his rage and the abuse. And he just continued to do what he always did, even though his wife is now the target. He ignored it, he denied it, he kind of redefined it, and he called his response of being passive, that is love to my father, who I'm supposed to respect and honor. Because the fruit of the Spirit is love, so I just need to love my father, even though he's an abusive man. And it took him years to realize that what he had been calling love, he called it long-suffering love. It wasn't love at all, it was cowardliness. And John had never actually wrestled with what it would mean to truly love his father. And in this case, it might actually mean that he needs to resist what is evil and for him to protect his wife, because this one-size-fits-all Valentine's Day view of love made him the enemy of love. And this was another thing I left up in my office, a book by Cloud & Townsend called Boundaries. Anyone ever read that book? Get it. Get the audio book. I was going to hold it up. It's upstairs. Boundaries. Cloud and Townsend, Townsend. Kind of the experts on how do we define healthy boundaries. Christians need to know boundaries, because being nice isn't always the best Christian response to people. Though we got to be really nice, we got to always turn the other cheek, got to do the right things. Love isn't always warm and gooey, and Christians, we need to be a little less nice and to be learning how to love maybe a healthy way, the right way, a better way in our church and in our families and our relationships through our community. If we are just nice, I'm not advocating being mean, but too much niceness can act as a mask that hides conflict that really does need to be addressed and pressed through in healthy ways to find a healthier resolution, maybe even careful mediation and negotiation, but that is very rare in Christian communities for us to do. Because what we need, too often, how I was taught is we need to tolerate the deep differences and just kind of mask it, put on a happy smile. Or maybe what I'll do is I will leave that church because there's too much conflict, and I'm going to go to a church where there's no conflict, where really I'm just unaware of the conflict, and I'm just going to be passive and stick my head in the sand. But what Christians really need to do, and what people need to do, is learn how to stay in a conversation without blowing up or retreating to a safe place where everyone is just nice. I don't know if you've ever been around just a group of nice people where everyone is nice, but there's deep issues. Well, it's safer than having an explosion, and because I don't like how that feels. But love is not always and not only nice. Love is patient, but that does not mean that it is passive. Love is kind, but that doesn't mean that you have to appease people. And one of the reasons I absolutely love the Apostle Paul, who wrote so many great letters throughout the Bible, is because he loved people deeply, but never was he out to win friends and influence people. Though he had deep friendships and profound influence that continually, even today, still is rippling through the world and having an incredible influence on the world. He also had conflicts and disputes with Peter. He argued and challenged and admonished churches that he thought were doing unhealthy and even damaging things. He named their sin, but he was never trying to shame people. The energy of his love, it went far beyond being nice, and it took a courage that is hard to develop, especially if you're just trying to stay in a safe, happy, nice, conflict-free, affirming relationship so that we're all happy. Because, we got to have the joy of the Lord. That means we got to all come in with my silly little face and pretend everything's okay when it's not. 1 John 4:12, no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, you might just get a glimpse of God. And many people think that means that we just have to be nice. It certainly doesn't mean that we get to be mean. That's not there either. But nice is not the point. One of my concerns when I give a message like this is that there are people who really need to hear about kindness, but they're really drawn that encourages, we get to be firm. Good, I get to be firm because they're already very firm and gruff people. And they have no problem defining boundaries and telling the truth with a bluntness. And what they need to hear is maybe that they do need to have more tenderness and kindness. And then there are some who are all about kindness, who are naturally soft and tender-hearted, and they start to get nervous when we start to talk about boundaries and being firm and telling the truth. And we really need to learn to tell the truth. And the fruit of the Spirit is love. But what is love, and what does love look like? One day Jesus picked up a child and said, "Let the children come to me." And I love that picture because that looks like love. And it's so clear. It's a clear picture to me. And to a woman who was taken in adultery one day, who's about to be stoned and killed by people, all the religious people, Jesus said, I don't condemn you. And to Peter, after his very cowardly betrayal as a friend, he said, Peter, I'm not done with you, though. I'm not done with you. Feed my sheep. And I love all of those pictures, and they look like love to me, and they're images and pictures of love, and they truly are. But the same Jesus who said and did that, and so many more too, he also said to his disciples, he said, oh, you have little faith, oh, you unbelieving and perverse generation, how long do I have to put up with you? And that doesn't sound very nice at all, and it doesn't feel warm and gooey, but is it love? I guess it would depend on how we would want to define what love is. I'm aware of what I'm doing today, and I'm doing it on purpose. This is just an entrance into this topic. I am trying to actually raise more questions than I'm actually trying to provide answers. I'm not trying to provide answers. If I had a point, I guess if I was able to give us and give me something, it would be, I just want to invite you, as I'm kind of trying to walk into some of the mystery of what it means to walk by the Spirit of God. And to realize that that walk may bring you and I to places that are not full of easy answers, because I don't always believe in easy answers. Because I think the Spirit may in fact bring us to places that are very complex and very confusing. And I hope that in those places where there's complexity and confusion, it will also bring us to a deeper dependence and a bolder trust in the Holy Spirit that we're learning to continue to walk with. I'm just inviting, this is just an invitation for you to participate with me over the next month as we dig in deeper into what it means to look at love maybe differently, and how in different situations. And I'm inviting you, I hope you take this the right way, to anguish. I hope you anguish a little bit as we wrestle with what it really means to love others from our heart, because nothing has more power in this world to reveal the face of God to people who don't know God than when the people of God struggle with and then demonstrate in authentic ways the real life, very down-to-earth, practical daily living of a love of God. I think this is powerful. So my question is, how is your love life? And would you be willing to take a journey with the Spirit into places that may be confusing about how you love others? And inviting Him into places right now where you might even think you're settled. Well, I'm a loving person. And maybe you are. I'm not going to say you're not. But would you be willing to invite the Spirit into that area even, and allow God to stir the waters a bit? That's something you have to do. I can't do that for you. And maybe we might find out and discover that some of our kindness is really just passivity. And maybe some of our commitment to truth is just that I need to control people, and it actually might come off mean. So would you be willing to let the Spirit of God show you that you're acting maybe too much like a mannequin in a beauty shop window who's so obsessed with looking holy and pure and Christian that you can't get your dress wrinkled, and that you actually can't stoop to serve anyone because you're afraid to get dirty, because you have to avoid the wrong kind of people maybe. And you've become untouchable, inaccessible to even the people that are close to you. And you call it holiness, but it's not. So Holy Spirit, come. God, we are inviting you into some of our unsettled places and asking you to disturb us and unsettle us so that we can come into deeper places with your Spirit, and deeper places of what it means to love each other and you from our heart, not grown out of a rule, but grown out of a relationship and heart and a spirit from you. And God, give us your grace as a community as we stumble and struggle with this, because sometimes we will do it wrong at times. So give us grace for each other. Holy Spirit, come and ask God for what you need. Or just tell God that you are willing. Tell God what you want in connection with this journey. Invite God into something. Just do it right now if you want. Nothing is more practical than finding God, than falling in love in a quiet, absolute, final way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, whom you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. Amen.